Hello, this is now volume 14 of the Musicians Weekly. And today I speak about the principles of rubato. So rubato is something that is not really taught in our times. And most teachers and most musicians think that rubato is something you just do by will, so ad libitum. And it's a question of your taste. Now, problem with taste is that taste is totally subjective, but the music you have is subjective maybe from the composer, but not from you. And so you need to be as objective as possible. And how does this work together with the rubato? So in classical and romantic and early modern and whatever kind of music, pre-classical and so on, we have the basic idea of an organic continuum of the music. That means it starts from zero tension, builds up tension in opposition in a sonata form or whatever, growing in the development toward a climax, then coming back and finally resolve all the tension. So this tells us that every moment involved is independent from all the other moments, so that every situation is a function of the whole. And the whole is included in every single situation. Now, what is rubato? If you just decide, I do something a bit slower here, I do a bit slow here, I move forward here, and I like it that way in that moment. So this is a kind of what we call arbitrary interpretation. You can do that. Everybody is free to do whatever he wants as long as he doesn't destroy other people's lives and fortune. But what is, if you want to be serious about rubato, that means rubato in connection with the continuum of coherent musical experience. Then you have to find out what is the relation of the rubato? What is the balance of the rubato? Normally, also some musicians of old school say that rubato is you steal something and then you give back. That is the kind of deal within the rubato. But of course, this doesn't mean very much. It means only for the situation. I move forward a bit, then it becomes slower. I become very slow, I move again, maybe a bit faster, and so on. So these small articulations. But these small articulations can totally break the momentum. And there is music that can bear less rubato or more rubato. So we can say that in the music of Brahms, of Tchaikovsky, of Dvorak, of Richard Strauss, of Mahler, there's a lot of natural rubato. In the music of Beethoven, less, and in the music of Bruckner, also definitively less. There is more rubato in the lyrical sections of Bruckner, but definitely also less rubato in the more motorically organized sections of a Bruckner symphony. And Bruckner basically has much less rubato than, let's say, Liszt or Wagner. But all these things, what do they depend on? So I had very interesting experiences with a very prominent German conductor who is a master in rubato. He has the orchestra really in his hands and he can do whatever he wants in the moment. And he does Schumann or Wagner with extreme rubato, also even Beethoven. It could work, it could not work. The thing is, when I listen to his performances, normally I cannot experience a basic tempo. And if I cannot experience a basic tempo, all the situation with the rubato is random, because I come from this to this to this to this. There is no real tension building, long scale development. And that means rubato needs a basic tempo where it is related to. And then all the ways I go away from the basic tempo into a faster tempo or into a slower tempo are building up more tension. So I get tension when I go away from the basic tempo, and also when I get slower. So For most musicians, when you get slower, it is normally associated with being more relaxed. But it's the opposite. Slower than basic tempo means more tension. Faster than basic tempo means more tension. In the sense of faster is an extrovert expression and slower is an introvert expression. But introversion doesn't mean relaxation. Introversion doesn't so openly mean tension as extroversion. So of course it's very obvious that in a lot of romantic music also people become faster when it goes toward the climax. But it can be very, very strong effect if you become slower when you come to the climax. You cannot say that so easily. So building a kind of, it cannot go on. It is against the natural instinct of becoming faster. Can also create tension. And so we have to understand that rubato only makes sense musically if it is connected to the form as a whole. That means you have a clear feeling, a clear knowledge of where you are in the situation inside the hall. Yes, this detail where you are now, how it is related to everything in the piece. And then you can find just the right expression for the rubato. And the rubato should underline the function of the moment. This also means that when you want to relax more toward the end of a piece, you will naturally use less rubato than, for example, in the exposition. But this is also not a thing that is just carved in stone, because other factors can come. For example, if an ending of a piece is potentially too long because it, for example, stays too long in one key, then it might be important that you just urge forward. This is also a kind of rubato. And then this kind of rubato can even lead to having finally a kind of stringendo and stay faster and therefore not lose the coherence. But that then goes out of the idea of rubato. We have rubato makes sense inside a continuous tempo. And then we have the idea of tempo continuo is not at all at any time mechanical. And that's very important, because now when we come to the very subtle meaning of rubato, rubato is everywhere where musical expression is. So we can say that the momentum, the straight momentum is, so to say, the male aspect. And the rubato, with all its expressive need, is the female aspect. And you have to unite them both. The one is objective, the other is subjective. Objectivity without subjectivity is dead. Subjectivity without objectivity is unstructured. We need them both, and we need to keep them in balance. And we can learn from singers. It always has to breathe. The rhythm always has to groove, to swing. That means if it's just mechanized, it's unmusical. And that's very important for musicians today, because many of us are totally used to play a lot of contemporary avant-garde where there is no continuum and where it's just the challenge to play everything as exactly as it is written down. This doesn't make sense in the older music. Of course you have to play what is written down, but you have to do it in correlation. And that means it's never mechanical. And also it has to be alive, it has to breathe. And when you have a modulation, maybe you have a kind of moment of hesitation in going on, or of pushing a bit forward and going on. All these things depend on the situation, on the need of the situation. Of course, on the detailed situation and on how this detailed situation is in connection to the whole. So, for example, in Mozart, when you do Don Giovanni or Figaro or Così fan tutte, the tempo is, if it's a really good performance, the tempo is never mechanically straight. It's always meandering a bit, but below obviousness. So, and then if you have more rubato, in Mozart, you normally don't have that, only in some particular situations. If you have more rubato and it's not a fermata, that means it's not just written that time shall stand still. then you need the limit of the rubato is that it still pulsates. It's still, the pulsation is basic. So you can become ti do don do don do ti do 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 ti do 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 tu ti ti tu di don do do do. This works. But if you then we come into chaotic regions. And now you think I'm joking, but a lot of, for example, harpsichord players play some of the music almost like that. And there is no basic tempo, and there are these crazy things. Also, pianist Shimon Barto tends to do that. Then maybe you lose any kind of continuity. Of course, it's very expressive, or it's very impressive, let's say. It's very impressive, but it's only impressive. It's not correlated. And so if you want to have effects, and if effect is the main thing, as in a lot of avant-garde music, then you can do. And it's done a lot with alt music, particularly when it's written for one instrument alone, because when you are alone, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to care whether other people would be able to follow you. And so we very, very often, for example, in the Bach cello suites, many players do just a long first, when we have only 8 notes, they do a very long first note, the one of the bar, and then the rest faster. And this bar after bar, this is a kind of routine rubato which has nothing to do with the sense of rubato. Because also there, if, for example, in the first suite, the first movement, this first note has no special meaning. It's just the same in the beginning. But the things that develop melodically after the beat, these are important. And there you could broaden and stress the tempo and bring in the new thing. And we have to understand that the slower we become with the note, the more meaning the notes, the more importance the note becomes. That means when we become broader in a rubato, we have to be very clear on which note we become that broad, in what context it is. Is this note very important? Or is this just something we expect and it has no importance at all? We could even leave it out without having any loss. All these things you have to take into consideration. And of course, you have to get it as an intuitive process. So you have to be consciously studying and realizing. But then when you are really in the flow of music, it should have become second nature. And that is the important thing about all the things that we study and implement on a phenomenological basis. We need a clear structure to understand. That means a clear basic tempo we oppose with some subjectively more satisfying rubatos. But if we don't have this structure, all the freedom makes no sense, because we are just lost. So if we have a clear structure, if we have a clear, coherent idea, clear correlating mind, then within that we can move freely without losing the context. If we don't have, we can move freely without context. So I'm very happy if you have more questions about it. I get a lot of emails on my email account, but I'm particularly happy if you discuss it here and if you go into communication about these subjects. So wishing you all the best. See you next time.